At her mother's retirement dinner, Dany raised a glass and made a public accusation. "She's the reason Dad gave up," she declared, her smile tight, rehearsed. Maggie Brennan didn't argue. She didn't even blink. The next morning, Dany would receive the letter her father left in secret, unopened for 9 years. Not a defense, but a quiet dismantling of her story. And once she read it, her podcast and her platform would never recover. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The crystal clink of glassware dulled under the weight of her words. Dany stood, her wine glass trembling just slightly in her manicured fingers, as if the truth in her throat was too bitter to swallow. The room quieted like a slow fade on a record, chatter dying mid-sentence, forks halting midair. She smiled a little too wide, a flash of teeth without warmth. "I just want to say a few words," she began, and Maggie already knew. The chandelier light above flickered briefly, one of those little ironies of timing, like a breath holding its own breath. "We all watched her climb," Dany continued. "Every rung, every promotion, always polished, always in charge, always elsewhere." A few guests shifted. Rick's eyes darted toward Maggie from across the linen-draped table, a subtle signal of unease. "But what we don't talk about is what it cost. How we watched Dad shrink. How he faded behind her ambition. And maybe it's time we say it plain." She raised her glass higher. "She's the reason he gave up." A sharp intake of air sliced through the room like the hiss of a kettle just beginning to boil. Somewhere to Maggie's left, a knife dropped against a porcelain plate with a ping that felt seismic. Rick stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Okay, Dany, that's enough." Dany tilted her head as if surprised anyone would interrupt what she saw as necessary truth. "You said speak from the heart." "No," Rick said, jaw tight. "We said to celebrate her." A small laugh escaped her. "And I am celebrating the end of a very long performance." Maggie didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply took a sip of water, replaced her glass, and nodded once, a slow, measured gesture, as if she'd been expecting this blow and had already counted her own ribs in preparation. Someone coughed in the back. No one else spoke. Adele leaned in close, her voice a hush barely louder than breath. "She doesn't know, does she?" Maggie's hand slid calmly into her clutch, fingers grazing the envelope she hadn't touched in 9 years. She traced the indentation of her late husband's handwriting. "Danielle," the seal still unbroken, the edges soft from time, but the weight inside intact. "She will," Maggie murmured, eyes never leaving her daughter. Dany sat down, her glass untouched. The wine inside reflected the light like blood not yet spilled. She smiled again, this time thinner. "Anyway, congrats, Mom." Then she sat. The rest of the evening carried on like a party struck by lightning, still structurally intact, but seared at the core. Conversations resumed in fragmented murmurs. Laughter attempted to resurface, but failed to hold. A few guests politely excused themselves early. The caterer asked Maggie if she wanted the leftover champagne boxed. She said yes. Adele stayed behind, helping stack plates and brush crumbs into linen napkins. "She's not just angry," she said gently. "She's rewriting history." Maggie looked toward the exit where Dany had gone, Rick trailing behind her in stunned silence. "She's been writing it for years. I just stopped editing." They walked to the parking lot in silence, the air thick with pine and leftover heat from a July evening too stubborn to cool. Back home, Maggie slipped off her shoes at the door like a ritual. Heels abandoned, dignity intact. The house was still, except for the tick of the hallway clock and the distant creak of wood settling into night. She entered the study, opened the drawer she hadn't touched in a decade, and pulled out the envelope. Placing it under the desk lamp, she stared at it as if it might open itself under the heat of everything left unsaid. It hadn't yellowed. Time had touched everything else in the house, but not this. Carefully, she placed it in the center of her desk. No candles, no music, just truth waiting. The shadows stretched long across the room, and for a long moment, Maggie stood still, just her and the weight of a man's final words meant for the daughter who blamed her for his silence. The envelope sat like a ghost on her desk, untouched but humming with something unresolved. Maggie stared at it beneath the soft brass glow of the lamp, the air still carrying a trace of the peach-scented candle she'd burned hours earlier. Her fingers hovered just above it, the way someone might reach for a photograph of a wound they'd stopped showing the world. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The name on the front, Danielle, was penned in her late husband's careful script. Each letter deliberate. No embellishments, just clarity. He'd written it days before his heart finally gave up. After years of detachment and silence that had spread through their home like moss, quiet but choking. He'd left it sealed with Carl Jensen, the family's attorney, with instructions to give it to Dany when Maggie said she was ready.
For 9 years, she hadn't been.
For 9 years, she'd let Dany shout into the world with a story built on a house of soot. And for 9 years, Maggie had stayed silent, not because she lacked the will to speak, but because Lee's truth was heavier than her dignity could carry alone. But that dinner, that toast, she stood now, reached for the phone, and dialed Carl's direct line. It rang twice before the familiar gravel of his voice answered. "Maggie," Carl said without greeting. "I saw the clip, the toast." That was low. She was aiming for blood. Maggie said, her voice flat. "She hit something close." Carl paused. "You're calling about the letter." "She's ready," Maggie replied, then softer. "Or maybe I am." On the other end, the shuffle of paperwork. "You sure you want this reopened?" "It's not gentle, Maggie." A small breath left her lips. Not quite a sigh. Neither was being called a killer in pearls. "You got that same calm I saw at Lee's funeral," Carl said. "Scares the hell out of people, you know." "I'm not angry, Carl. I'm just done carrying her blame for things she never had the courage to ask about." He was quiet then. "All right, I'll have it couriered. Signature required. Morning delivery." She nodded, knowing he couldn't see it. "Thank you." The line went dead with a soft click, but the conversation remained in the air, mingling with the hush of the house and the occasional creak of floorboards expanding in summer heat. Later that evening, Adele came by. She let herself in without knocking, carrying 2 cups of black coffee, and that look she wore when concern and loyalty pulled equally at her mouth. "You really doing this?" Adele asked, handing Maggie the drink. "She needs to hear it from him." "She wanted a fight," Adele said, settling onto the couch. "This letter? It's a scalpel, not a shield." Maggie didn't sit. She walked to the kitchen table, opened a new pad of ivory stationery, and began to write with a slow, precise hand. "Danielle, you asked for the truth. This one isn't mine. It's his." She folded the note and slipped it into a smaller envelope, tucking it beside the one Lyle had left. She sealed both inside a courier pouch and placed it on the counter like an offering. Adele watched her quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That letter doesn't just clear your name. It wounds Maggie." Maggie's eyes held hers across the room. So did hers. Just publicly. They didn't speak again. Not when Adele left. Not when Maggie dimmed the lights. Not when she stood at the front door, watching the night settle over the lawn like a velvet sheet pulled over something unspeakable. The next morning, the courier arrived. Maggie handed over the package without a word. The message came at 6:12 a.m. sharp and immediate, like a slap across a still sleeping face. "Cruel move. Pathetic even for you." No greeting, no signature. Just that. Maggie read it once, twice. She didn't flinch, didn't frown. She simply slid her reading glasses off her nose and set them beside her coffee. The steam rose from the mug in lazy tendrils curling into the pale Idaho morning light filtering through her kitchen window. She didn't reply. Let silence do what words no longer could. Outside, a mourning dove cooed somewhere beyond the hedges. The world was quiet but not calm. That text had a thrum beneath it. A panic wrapped in spite. Maggie could feel it. Her phone rang before she'd finished her toast.
"Rick."
She knew before answering that Dany hadn't sent him. Rick volunteered for these middleman roles like someone who knew landmines would never spare his shoes, but stepped anyway. "Morning," she said flatly. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "What's in the letter?" Maggie swirled her coffee. "His handwriting. His truth." "That's not what I asked. It's not mine to paraphrase."
A pause.
Rick sighed audibly, but it wasn't frustration. It was the sound of a man caught between two lives, both heavier than they looked. "She's furious. Maggie says you're trying to manipulate her with guilt." Maggie laughed once, dry and short.
She called it a guilt trap.
Her words. "Well," Maggie said, standing and walking toward the small antique cabinet where she kept her old family files. "I called it closure." She opened the cabinet. It creaked just like it always had. Inside, she reached for the fireproof lockbox on the bottom shelf, black metal, unforgiving. The envelope was already back in her possession. Carl had called her the night before, returned to send her. She refused to sign for it, used a red marker, big angry letters. Now the envelope lay in her palm again, as pristine as the day Lyle had sealed it. Across the front, in all caps read, "Return to sender." She ran her thumb across the ink. It had bled slightly into the paper fibers. Angry and careless, she opened the lockbox, placed the envelope inside, and closed the latch with a soft click. Rick's voice crackled in her ear again. "She says you're using Dad's ghost to win some argument." Maggie's tone didn't shift. "I never entered the argument. She said you ambushed her. She gave a speech at my retirement dinner, calling me the reason her father gave up." Maggie stepped back from the cabinet, the light now warming the wooden floors at her feet. "I just responded with the only voice that still matters." "She's not going to let this go," Rick said quietly. Maggie walked back to the kitchen and looked out the window again. A school bus rumbled by in the distance, orange and slow like memory itself. "Neither am I." She hung up first. Later that evening, Adele came by with a peach pie and the kind of eyes that said, "I know more than I'll ever say aloud." Maggie served 2 slices, but only ate half of hers. "She returned it unopened?" Adele asked, shaking her head. "Marked it like junk mail," Maggie replied, tone clipped. "She'll twist it," Adele warned. "Turn it into a new kind of victim story."
"She already has a platform," Maggie said.
"What's one more stage?" Adele paused. "You know she's been recording again, right?" Maggie blinked. "About what?" She posted a teaser. "New episode drops tomorrow." The caption read, "When parents weaponize grief for the first time all day." Maggie's hand stilled midair. "She's doing another episode." Adele nodded, lips pursed. "Sounds like a direct hit." Maggie stood, crossed the room, and pulled open the drawer by the phone. Inside was the flash drive with Lee's recording and the copies of their wills. She touched neither. She didn't need to arm herself. Some battles weren't worth armor. The podcast began with music, moody piano echoing like a lament staged in someone's living room. But it wasn't the music that caught Adele's breath as she sat in Maggie's sunroom, earbuds in, brows furrowed. It was the voice. Dany's voice, low and measured, like someone rehearsing grief to sound graceful. "I used to think my mother's silence was strength," she said. "Now I see it for what it was. Distance, indifference, disguised as discipline." Adele pulled out the earbuds like they burned. Maggie, sipping tea nearby and sorting through legal papers, didn't even look up. "She posted it?" Maggie asked, already knowing. Adele dropped the earbuds on the table. 15 minutes of twisting knives. She called it "When Parents Crush Dreams." "You're a monster in it. And your marriage?" "Well, apparently Lyle gave up trying to matter." Maggie exhaled long and thin.
She didn't win.
She'd prepared herself for this long before Dany ever spoke into a mic. "She knows it gets her attention," Maggie said calmly. "Rage gets retweets. Wounds get listeners." Adele looked at her hard. "She made you sound like a coal machine, like someone who stepped over your husband's body on your way to a school board meeting." Maggie stood and walked to the dining room buffet, where she kept Lyle's letter locked in the same fireproof box as her deed and pension documents. She opened it slowly, retrieving the flash drive she'd tucked beside it days ago. "She's not interested in my truth," Maggie said, walking back. "Only in keeping hers undisturbed." "You could publish the letter," Adele said, her voice quiet but fierce. "You could end this." "I won't humiliate her," Maggie said. Carl called that evening, his voice tight with the kind of discomfort attorneys only show when something toes the line of personal. "You've seen the episode?" Maggie looked out the window at the lavender dusk blanketing the street. "I have. You could release his letter to the press or play the recording. You're legally in the clear. You'd be protecting your reputation, not attacking hers. She's not the audience anymore." Maggie said she'll read it when silence hurts more than truth. There was a beat of silence on Carl's end before he said, "You're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting him." "He's dead," Maggie answered softly. But what he said isn't. The next morning, Maggie wrote a new will. 2 pages notarized. Everything. Her home, her retirement funds, her investments would go to a scholarship foundation she planned to build in Lee's name. The criteria would be simple: resilience in the face of inherited fiction. Dai's name was never mentioned. Later that week, while Adele clipped flowers from Maggie's garden and pretended not to hover, Maggie sealed a padded envelope addressed to Rick. Inside was the flash drive labeled in her familiar cursive for when she listens. She didn't include a note, didn't need to. Rick would know what it was and, more importantly, when to use it. That evening, she stood at the mailbox, hands steady, breath even. Cicadas chirped from the bushes, the air still clinging to the day's heat. She slid the envelope in and let the metal lid snap shut. She didn't turn back to the house right away. She just stood there beneath the sky going darker by degrees, knowing the next move belonged to the person who thought she had the whole board figured out. Rick sat on the edge of the bed, the flash drive warm between his fingers, like truth had body heat. It had arrived 2 days ago, in a plain padded envelope, no return address, just the words in Maggie's unmistakable cursive for when she listens. He hadn't shown it to Dany right away. Not after the second podcast went up, not after she'd called her mother a sculptor of grief, chiseling guilt into everyone around her. But last night had changed something. He'd watched her sit on the closet floor, a wine bottle balanced between her knees, voice cracking while she deleted the hate comments one by one from her phone. She didn't see him watching, but something in the silence of that moment, fragile and false, told him she was unraveling and not ready to admit it. Now, in the hush of early morning, while Dany still slept curled on her side like she used to in college during exam weeks, Rick plugged the flash drive into his laptop. There was one file, Leah Brennan, Final Wave. His hand hovered over the trackpad for a moment, then click. No music, no intro. Just breathe. "Danielle, if you're hearing this, your mother decided you were ready. And I hope you are, because I never was." Rick's chest tightened. The voice wasn't just familiar. It was Lee's. Older, tired, but real. Not performative. Just worn. "I cheated on your mother in 2009. A one-time conference mistake. She found out. I didn't confess. She caught me and still she stayed. For you, for the lie of normal." Rick sat back, jaw slack, hand falling from the mouse. The next lines came like a slow funeral procession. "I blamed her. I let you blame her. I let both of you carry what I broke because it was easier than owning what I'd become. A coward. A man who hollowed himself out and then resented everyone who noticed." The voice cracked barely, but it did. "Your mother didn't ruin me. I ruined our trust, and she stayed. You don't know what staying costs." Rick stopped the playback. He couldn't hear more. Not yet. He reached for the envelope again and found the letter Maggie had included, the original on cream stationery in Lee's handwriting. The penmanship was unmistakable. He scanned it quickly. The message aligned word for word with the audio down to the phrasing. "Coward resented. She stayed downstairs." He heard the floorboards creak. Dany was awake. By the time she came into the kitchen, hair tangled, sweatshirt slipping off one shoulder, Rick had the letter unfolded on the table. "What's that?" she asked, voice groggy. "Your father's letter," he said evenly. "The one you sent back unopened." Dany froze. You read it? I listened. He said it's a recording. He read it himself. She laughed dryly. Convenient. You really think Mom wouldn't fake that?
Dany.
His voice was low. Not pleading, not angry, steady. It's his handwriting, his cadence, the way he clears his throat between sentences. It's him. She crossed her arms, defensive stance already in place. It's too neat. A last-minute confession to fix everything.
No.
She didn't send it to fix anything. He said she sent it because you asked for the truth and you threw it in her face. Dany looked down at the letter. Her face betrayed the smallest twitch of fear. A flicker. She could have forged it. Rick walked to the counter, picked up his phone, and tapped it a few times. She anticipated that. He turned the screen toward her. A photo of Lyle's old journals. Maggie's screenshot. Identical handwriting, side-by-side comparisons. Your mom didn't forge this, he said. Your father did. His own eraser. Dany said nothing. Her eyes didn't move, but her shoulders dropped half an inch like gravity had doubled in the room. Rick didn't wait. He pulled the laptop closer and pressed play again. Lyle's voice filled the air between them, impossibly alive. I was never brave. Your mother was. She bore the shame quietly, so you wouldn't have to. Dany's knees gave slightly. She gripped the counter. The sound of Lyle's voice ended, and silence poured into the kitchen like smoke. Dany sat at the table, spine rigid, eyes locked on the laptop screen like it had just come alive and accused her of something she hadn't prepared to answer for. Her mouth was slightly open, but no words came out. Rick didn't say anything at first. He just watched her. The click of the trackpad had been the loudest thing in the room for 10 minutes now, and even that had stopped. Outside, a sprinkler sputtered to life, its rhythmic sound almost intrusive. Dany slowly leaned forward, elbows pressing into the wood like her arms needed something to brace against. Her fingers were white-knuckled around the edge of the table. He should have told me, she whispered finally, voice thin and shaky. When he was alive. He should have told me. Rick set his mug down. He did, just not in time. Her head snapped toward him. No, he wrote it for her. He trusted her. Not me. Rick didn't flinch because she stayed. And you never asked. Dany's face twisted like she might fight that, but it never came. Her shoulders curled inward instead, like someone folding into themselves to survive the cold. She looked down at her hands. Her thumb kept brushing the edge of her nail over and over. She made it look like she was the victim, Dany muttered. My whole life, she just endured in silence and let me fill in the blanks. Rick was quiet then. And you filled them with blame. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the tile, and walked out of the room. Rick waited, listening for a door slam. None came. Upstairs, Dany paced. The audio file still played in her head. That voice, her father's voice, wasn't reading from a script. He stammered, paused. He was human in it, smaller than she remembered, not the man in the office chair who used to say, "Ask your mother." But a man dismantling his own story one sentence at a time. Downstairs, Rick texted Maggie. She heard it. All of it. 10 minutes later, Maggie read the message in her den. She closed her phone without responding. Quietly, she stood and walked to the shelf where she kept a small wooden box labeled Dany, Old Podcasts. It wasn't literal, just a folder in her phone, and a physical metaphor. She opened her laptop, found the playlist of Dany's most venomous episodes, some she hadn't even listened to all the way through, and deleted them one by one. A clean sweep. She emptied the trash bin, too. She didn't need digital scars. The real ones were more than enough. Later that night, she sat with Adele on the porch, the cicadas humming a tired lullaby from the trees. She listened? Adele asked. She did. And static, no rebuttal, no mic in her hand, just nothing. Adele smiled softly. Sometimes silence is the only honest thing we get. Maggie nodded, and the only thing I'll give her for a while. Meanwhile, in her home 2 blocks away, Dany stared at her phone screen, Instagram open. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then backed away. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound hollow, nothing that wouldn't feel like theater. She tapped the photo icon, selected a solid black square, posted it with no caption, let the void do what her voice never could. The unraveling didn't start with a headline. It started in the comment section. A single listener posed a question beneath Dany's latest episode post on Instagram. Simple, almost polite. Did your dad really say your mom crushed him? Because the letter your husband referenced sounds different. It got 5 likes in 10 minutes, then 20, then 1 repost on Reddit. Within 24 hours, a thread titled, "Is Dany Brennan a fraud?" hit the front page of the r/Podwatch subreddit. The tone wasn't cruel, just surgical. A user named Pros Before Pain outlined each episode chronologically, then juxtaposed quotes from her podcast with the letter Rick had anonymously shared in a grief support forum. Each contradiction became a wound. Every poetic monologue Dany had delivered about her mother's ice-veined ambition now rang false against Lee's trembling confession. By day 3, sponsors started pulling out. The mattress company was first. An apologetic email with terms and conditions highlighted. Then the mental health app severed ties, citing alignment concerns. Dany noticed the drop in ad revenue before the news hit. Her inbox was filling with subject lines she didn't open. Concerned listener about episode 12. Was it really your mom? Did you lie? She deleted the first 100. Then she started pulling down episodes. First the overt ones, the ones that named Maggie directly, then the subtle ones, the metaphors she thought were cloaked in enough abstraction to skate under the radar. By the end of the week, her library of content had shrunk by nearly half. What remained was hollow. Episodes about general burnout, toxic productivity, over-edited reflections that sounded eerily sanitized. She stopped recording altogether. Rick watched it happen from a quiet corner of the house, not intervening. He wanted to, but every time he opened his mouth, Dany shut down, fingers clenching around her coffee mug, jaw tight with pride or panic. He couldn't tell which. "She's not talking to anyone," he said to Maggie one evening over the phone. "Not me, not her listeners." Just curled inward. "She's lived on the stage too long," Maggie replied. "Now she's forgotten how to stand still when the lights go out." Rick hesitated. "Did you plan this?" "No," Maggie said. "But I let the truth breathe." Across town, Maggie sat with Adele at the same kitchen table where the letter had rested weeks before. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the pine trees, casting shadows like slats from prison bars across the floor. "She finally swallowed it," Adele murmured, stirring honey into her tea.
What?
Maggie asked, though she knew. "The silence, the kind she handed you for years. You didn't throw it back. You let her taste it." Maggie didn't smile. "I didn't need revenge. I needed peace." "And, did you get it?" "No," she said, "but I got the floor back beneath my feet." That night, Maggie opened her email to find a message from the Boise Education Alliance. Subject: "We'd be honored if you'd speak at this year's statewide retirement conference." She read the invitation twice. It wasn't the platform that mattered. It was who had built it and how. She clicked accept. The next morning, the conference's Instagram page posted the lineup. Margot Brennan, former principal, Pinebrook High, endurance and grace, lessons they don't write into the curriculum. The post garnered 112 likes in under 2 hours, but it wasn't the count that mattered. It was the single name on the list of viewers, Dana Brennan. The morning of the conference, Maggie laid out her navy dress suit with quiet precision. No fuss, no pins or jewelry, just the sharp lines of a woman who had spent a lifetime being mistaken for someone invulnerable. Dany had never been invited. Not by name, not by hint, not even in the breath between Maggie's sentences. She hadn't earned her way into this room, and Maggie had no intention of pretending otherwise. In the green room, the hum of fluorescent lights blended with the low murmur of other retirees reviewing notes and sipping burnt coffee. Maggie stood apart, back straight, shoulders set. Her folder was thin, just 3 pages, no slides. When they called her name, she stepped onto the small stage, blinking under the soft wash of overhead lighting. Rows of chairs stretched out in front of her, filled with teachers, principals, assistants, People who'd survived decades of shrinking budgets, ungrateful parents, and long nights grading papers no one remembered writing. She placed her notes on the lectern, adjusted the mic, and began. They told us we'd leave a legacy, that if we taught with integrity, cared deeply, and showed up every day, the rest would take care of itself. That was never true. Her voice was even, but something in it, something low and steady, carried heat. A quiet rebellion stitched into her cadence. The hardest lesson I ever learned wasn't in a classroom. It was after. It was learning to release what doesn't grow you, what warps you, what wants you small. There was no mention of Lyle, no trace of Dany, not even coded references. Maggie refused to let them take up more space in her story than they already had. This speech was hers, and it bloomed in the mouths of those who needed it. When she finished, the applause came like a wave, not thunderous, but respectful, earnest. One woman in the front row wiped tears from behind her glasses. Maggie stepped down from the stage and left through the side exit, declining interviews and photo ops. She didn't need to archive her moment. It had already happened. That evening, the video went live on the conference's Facebook page. Maggie didn't share it, didn't comment, but the clip spread anyway, retweeted by young teachers and old ones, quoted in newsletters, screen captured in TikToks she'd never see. And somewhere across town, Dany watched it alone. No sound, just her mother's face composed, speaking from a screen that used to belong to her. The caption below the video read, "Release what doesn't grow you. Margot Brennan, Boise Ed Conference 2025. Dany didn't react. She didn't like the post, didn't rage tweet or make an audio response. She just stared at it, eyes unreadable, phone resting in her lap. The next morning, Maggie visited Lee's grave. The cemetery smelled like freshly cut grass and wet stone. The sprinkler system had just shut off, leaving beads of water clinging to the granite headstones like tears with nowhere to fall. She stood over his marker, still and unhurried. "It's done now," she said softly. She knows. Maybe not everything, but enough. She crouched, brushing away a dried pine needle from the top of the slab. It wasn't about punishment. It was about ending the echo. Behind her, Adele approached slowly, a thermos in one hand. "Think she'll say anything?" Maggie straightened, brushing her palms on her pants. Not with her voice. That afternoon, the mail came late. Maggie thumbed through the envelopes absently until her fingers paused on one familiar slanted handwriting across the front. No return address, but she knew 2 pages folded cleanly, unopened. She placed it on the kitchen counter without touching it again. Maggie didn't open the letter with bare hands. She slid on a pair of latex gloves from under the sink, not out of drama but distance. Some paper carried bacteria, others carried memory. This one held both. She sat at the dining table, sun streaking across the polished wood in angled gold. The envelope, already slit with a letter opener, waited beside her cup of mint tea. She stared at it for a long moment before finally pulling out the 2 folded pages. The first line was an apology. Sort of. "I was angry, and I didn't know how else to grieve." Maggie let her eyes move slowly down the page. Dany's handwriting was familiar, still looping her Y like a schoolgirl, still pressing too hard on her punctuation. She read it all once, then again, the apology thin but present, the self-justification heavy and clumsy. "I saw you getting praised while I was still aching. You moved on so quickly. I mistook your composure for coldness. I blamed you because I didn't want to blame him." By the second page, the tone shifted. "You let me believe things that weren't true. I felt like a ghost in a family that wouldn't talk to me. I was trying to control the narrative because I felt like I'd lost mine." Maggie reached the end. No signature, just a short final line. "You don't have to respond. I wouldn't if I were you." She placed the letter down and peeled off the gloves slowly, like someone exiting a quarantine tent. The smell of mint lingered in the air, sharp and unforgiving. She didn't cry. There was nothing in the letter she hadn't already heard through podcast speakers in public jabs and absence, but the paper at least had been quiet. An hour later, She opened her drawer and pulled out a yellow sticky note. She wrote one line: "Grief is no excuse for cruelty." No salutation, no punctuation. She folded it neatly and slipped it into an envelope addressed to Dany, sealing it with the press of one deliberate thumb. She dropped it in the mailbox that evening as the sky turned soft and purplish over Boise. A lawnmower buzzed 2 houses down. Somewhere, a wind chime sang 3 uncertain notes. That night, Adele came over with a bottle of red and no intention of making it last more than an hour. "She finally wrote?" Adele asked, curling her feet under her on the couch. 2 pages. Maggie said, refilling both their glasses. Said she was angry. Said she didn't know how else to grieve. Sounds like a soft rewrite. She left out most of the blood. Adele studied her. "And what did you say back?" "1 sentence, not even a full one." Adele raised her glass. "Closure doesn't always clap back. Sometimes it just locks the door." The next morning, Maggie called Carl. "Update the trust," she said, her voice clear. "To what?" he asked, already scribbling. "To exclude Dany entirely," Maggie replied, "and redirect the full fund into the scholarship under Lyle's name." Carl paused. "Are you sure? You don't want to leave her anything?" "I'm giving her what she asked for. Distance." He cleared his throat. "What should I write as the scholarship criteria?" Maggie didn't hesitate. "Resilience in the face of family myth." Carl exhaled into the receiver. "That's good. Painfully good. I lived it." She said it should mean something. The paperwork was filed that same week. Maggie didn't watch for the mail this time. She didn't brace for backlash. She simply folded the original copy of the trust and placed it behind Lee's letter in her fireproof box. 2 days later, Rick texted her. She found out, didn't say anything, just stared at the paperwork like it was a death certificate. Maggie read it once, then deleted the message. Some inheritances come in numbers, others come in silence. The first draft sat on Maggie's screen for 3 days, untouched. Just a blinking cursor beside the title. The blame. "We pass when the truth hurts." Each time she opened the document, her hands hovered above the keyboard like someone reaching for a pulse they weren't sure still beat. She wasn't writing to settle a score. That had already happened in paperwork and silence and erased audio files. She was writing to reclaim oxygen, to unseal the room where shame had been rotting in the corners for too long. The op-ed began without preface. "There's a difference between surviving grief and rewriting it. I learned that the hard way." She never used Dai's name. Not once.
She didn't need to.
The power in the piece wasn't in naming. It was in dismantling assumptions. "My husband and I weren't perfect. He fell. I stayed." That's not a trophy. That's a scar you keep under your sleeve. But sometimes staying is louder than leaving. She quoted Lyle's letter directly, just 1 line italicized for weight. "You don't know what staying costs." It wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. She submitted it to the Boise Standard on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, it was on their homepage. By Friday, it had 6,200 shares. Teachers commented beneath it. Widows, grown children who'd misread their parents' silences. One man wrote, "I've been angry with my mother for 15 years. This made me stop and ask what I never did before." Maggie read the comments once, then closed her laptop. She didn't need applause. The echo was enough. The phone buzzed later that evening. Voicemail. Rick's voice low and steady. "You did it right, Maggie. You told the truth without setting fire to her. That's more grace than most people ever give." Maggie saved the message, then immediately deleted the notification. It was never about being told she was right. She sat on her back porch that night, wrapped in a worn blanket, the smell of lilacs drifting from the garden Lyle once refused to weed. Adele called just to say, "You really wrote it." Without flinching. "I didn't flinch," Maggie replied. "I just held the mirror up. What if she reads it?" She already has. Across town, Dany scrolled the article on her phone in the dark, each paragraph landing like the slow unraveling of a bandage. There was no accusation, no anger, just weight. And Dany recognized every line, not because she'd heard them before, but because she'd avoided them for years. She didn't text, didn't comment, but she didn't turn the phone off either. She read it again and again. The next Monday, Maggie stopped by the post office. The clerk handed her a plain manila envelope marked with the Scholarship Foundation's return address. Inside was a single letter typed and signed in ink. Dear Mrs. Brennan, I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the money, but for the truth. I lost my father to suicide last year, and no one would talk about it. Your piece didn't fix that, but it cracked the silence. That's something. Yours? KJ Sullivan, 17, Twin Falls High School. Maggie stood there in the lobby, fluorescent lights buzzing, surrounded by the faint smell of printer paper and packing tape. The world outside moved in its usual patterns. But inside that letter, something had finally stopped hiding. She folded it once and tucked it into her purse beside her keys and wallet. Maggie stared at the blinking cursor like it owed her something. One more truth, one last thread to pull from the tangle. She'd written the headline already. Why I Didn't Leave. The scholarship site's coordinator had asked for something personal but uplifting. Maggie had smiled politely and said nothing because what she was about to write wasn't going to fit neatly into anyone's idea of comfort. She took a slow breath, the scent of her morning coffee still clinging faintly to the air, and began. I stayed with a man who broke something sacred. I didn't stay out of pride or denial. I stayed because I knew that grief doesn't cancel out love. It warps it, stretches it, tries to bury it, but if you're strong enough, you dig it out. Each paragraph built slowly, each word pulled from years she hadn't named aloud. She wrote about Lee's silence, the way it filled their house after the affair like smoke from a fire they never talked about. She wrote about watching her daughter's love for him calcify into worship, blind to the man beneath the myth. Some people think staying is weakness. They think silence is complicity. I used to wonder that, too. But I've learned that staying when everything in you is aching to run is a strength most people never recognize, especially daughters who are too young to understand the fracture they were living inside of. She didn't defend Lyle, but she didn't demolish him either. She let him stay human, fallible, someone worth grieving and also worth questioning. When Maggie finished, her fingers hovered over the last line like she was sealing a wound. Love doesn't always look like protection. Sometimes it looks like endurance. She hit submit. That night, Adele came by and read the piece aloud in Maggie's living room, the paper trembling faintly in her hands. By the third paragraph, her voice cracked. She blinked rapidly and dabbed her eye with a cocktail napkin she'd found in her purse. You always were the stronger one, she whispered. Maggie gave a small smile. I just stayed longer. They didn't talk after that. Didn't need to. They sat side by side on the couch, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence like background noise in an old movie where the real story had already unfolded. 2 days later, an editor from a national educator's blog reached out. They said the piece hit the marrow of what teachers, parents, and people who endure needed to hear. They asked if they could feature it. Maggie said yes, but refused to provide a headshot. The story was the face. When the essay went live, it circulated fast, shared by therapists, professors, exhausted single mothers who left quietly, and those who stayed anyway. The comment section didn't explode with debate. It pulsed with recognition. Dany saw the article. She didn't rage post. She didn't screenshot a pull quote with a snide caption. She just read it slowly, eyes fixed on the same lines Maggie had once been afraid to speak aloud. Then she logged off. No follow-up post, no story, no status, just absence. That night, Maggie's phone buzzed. It was late, well past her usual bedtime. But she was still up folding laundry in the den with the TV playing muted reruns in the background. The message was from a number already in her phone. Dany, can I see you? Maggie stared at the screen for a long moment, the scent of lavender dryer sheets and old grief wrapping around her like static. The door chimed as Maggie stepped inside the coffee shop. And for a moment, the world felt thinner than the steam rising off espresso cups. She spotted Dany immediately, corner booth back against the brick wall, eyes on the window like she wanted to escape but couldn't remember how. Her hands were clasped around a ceramic mug, Knuckles pale, lipstick half-worn. There was no phone in sight, no laptop, no mask. She came empty-handed. That said everything. Maggie walked over slowly, her shoes soft against the tile, her pulse even softer. Dany looked up as she approached. She tried to smile.
Failed. Hi, she said. Just that, not Mom. I'm sorry.
Maggie slid into the seat across from her. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't reach for the past. A barista passed by with a tray of chai and caramel mochas. The scent of cinnamon and burnt milk floated between them. Maggie didn't order anything. For a full 30 seconds, neither of them spoke. The noise around them filled the silence. Cups clinking, milk frothing, someone's laughter from across the shop. Then Dany broke. I didn't know how to sit across from you without trying to win. Maggie tilted her head slightly. Are you trying now?
No, Dany whispered.
I'm just trying. Another pause. This one softer. Maggie folded her hands in her lap and waited. Dany looked down into her mug like it might offer some kind of guidance. Her voice was uneven. I used to think you stayed because you needed to be right, that you held everything together just to say you could. But it wasn't that. Maggie didn't nod. Didn't validate or correct. It was survival, wasn't it? Dany finally asked. Maggie's voice came low, steady.
It was.
Dany exhaled, her shoulders dropping an inch, maybe more. I hated how you endured. It made me feel small.
You were never small, Maggie said.
You were just angry. So was I. Dany looked up, eyes glassy. Not crying, just tired. Worn in the way people get after too many years spent trying to carry something too heavy with the wrong muscles.
I don't want your money, she said.
Or a place in the will.
I know.
I wasn't going to offer that. It landed, but it didn't sting. It cleared the room between them like fog lifting from glass. Dany bit her lip. I don't even know what I want. You wanted to be seen, Maggie said gently. And now you are. They sat like that, mother and daughter stripped of roles, stripped of war stories. Just two women trying to recognize each other without the camouflage of blame. Outside, rain had started. Just a mist, the kind that doesn't leave puddles, but coats everything in a quiet sheen. It blurred the windows, softened the cars passing by, made everything look less severe. Dany reached for her cup again, but didn't drink. Her hand trembled faintly. Without a word, Maggie reached across the table. Her fingers settled gently over Dany's. No lecture, no absolution, just the truth of touch. Something weightless and wordless passed between them. Maggie stood in the doorway of her study, phone in hand, staring at the home screen like it was a painting hung in the wrong gallery. For the last 9 years, the photo had been one she barely noticed, an empty shoreline in black and white, abstract and safe. It had matched her mood at the time, untouchable, distant, a life cordoned off from memory. But today her finger hovered over the image, then tapped, then replaced it. The new lock screen blinked to life. Dany and Lyle. Years ago, a photo Maggie hadn't touched in over a decade. Lyle was in the backyard holding a kite that had just dove into the grass. Dany, maybe 9, was doubled over laughing. Her hand gripped his wrist as if to steady him, but it was the other way around. The sun had caught them mid-laughter, their eyes squinting, blurred by motion. Maggie had taken the picture, without them knowing. She looked at the photo now, not with longing, but with recognition. This had been real, too. Even the broken stories had warm chapters. Adele stopped by later that afternoon, dragging Wind with her through the front door. You changed your photo, she said, catching the screen before Maggie locked it. Maggie offered no expression. I didn't rewrite anything. I just added the page that came before the fall. Adele studied her. You softened. No, Maggie replied, pouring tea. I stabilized. That night, Maggie sat in the den, blanket over her knees as the soft hum of the dishwasher whispered from the kitchen. Her phone lit up with a notification. New podcast episode.
What I should have said before the end.
Dany's voice filled the room the way dust does. Quiet, floating into places you didn't know needed cleaning. There were no intro bells, no ad breaks, no mood music. Just her voice, small, exposed. This is my last episode. I'm not here to perform grief anymore. I'm here to speak it unpolished. Maggie didn't press play. Instead, she clicked save episode, then closed the app. She didn't need to hear Dany's version in real time. Some truths were no longer hers to carry. The act of saving it, archiving it, was enough. A soft nod toward effort, without the demand for reward. Across town, Dany sat in her recording space, bare now. The sponsor board behind her was gone. The room no longer had the warm buzz of lights or the staged ambience of curated grief. Just her, a mic, and the letter in her lap. She unfolded it, hands trembling slightly, and read Lee's words aloud, start to finish. No commentary, no sidebars, no clever turns of phrase, just the man who'd written it and the daughter finally brave enough to hear it through her own voice. Each word chipped at her carefully built persona. By the end, her voice cracked twice. She didn't edit the tremble out. She left it in like scar tissue too deep to remove. She hit upload, then deleted the app from her phone. She didn't check comments. She didn't need feedback. She sent a single message to her mother. No emojis, no puntuación. Thank you for not fighting back. That's what broke me. Maggie read it under the lamp in her bedroom. The world outside slick with Idaho rain. She set the phone face down on her nightstand, then turned out the light. Her room was quiet. Finally, the wine glasses clinked gently, but no one toasted to tenure or pension. They toasted to survival, and the room knew exactly what that meant. 1 year to the day after the retirement dinner that detonated beneath her dignity, Maggie hosted a dinner of her own, quiet, intentional, invitation only. The long walnut table was set for 6, each seat filled by a woman who had stood beside her when the story bent. Not coworkers, not neighbors, lifelines. Soft amber light glowed from overhead Edison bulbs. Lavender roasted chicken and a lemon orzo salad perfumed the air. Adele brought fresh bread from the farmer's market and wore a silk scarf that refused to stay tied. I thought I'd cry tonight, Maggie said, pouring wine. But I don't feel grief anymore, just light. Must be the orzo, Adele replied, raising her glass. They laughed, but there was weight under the warmth. The kind that comes when everyone at the table has known what it means to bite back words. To carry shame they didn't create, to endure in plain view while the world mistook them for composed. The toasts came after the second course, not to career milestones, but to the unseen. To the things we swallowed so others could eat in peace, said Mara, a former colleague who once left a husband at a mortgage in the same month. To never mistaking silence for weakness, said Adele. When the final toast came around, all eyes landed on Maggie. She raised her glass slowly, her voice calm. To letting go of what bends you too far. As the applause settled and dessert was cleared, Maggie's phone buzzed once in her apron pocket. She slipped it out discreetly and scanned the screen. A message from the Scholarship Foundation director. Maggie just wanted you to know the Brennan Fund passed its 3-year projection in 1. People are donating in your name. Maggie blinked, almost laughed. She passed the phone to Adele with a knowing smile. Adele read the message aloud. The table exhaled in unison like they'd all been holding something in their lungs and hadn't realized it. You think she ever understood the damage? Adele asked quietly once the others had moved to the kitchen for coffee. Maggie didn't hesitate. It wasn't about her understanding. It was about me not carrying it anymore. Later, alone in her study, Maggie opened her voicemail. The last saved message from Rick still waited there. The one he left after the op-ed, his voice low, firm, full of quiet awe. You did it right, Maggie. You didn't torch the house, but you left the firewood stacked and dry. She stared at the message for a full minute, then deleted it. She didn't need it anymore. The next morning, her mail arrived late, bundled tight with ads and nonprofit appeals, but in the middle, one envelope stood out. No logo, handwritten return address, KJ Sullivan, U of I admissions. Inside was a college application essay. I never knew her. Not really. But she taught me that you can carry a wound and still walk forward without bleeding on everyone else. My mother couldn't do that. Maggie Brennan did. That's why I want to teach someday. Maggie read it once, then again, then folded it carefully, placing it between the pages of her planner. No tears, no smile, just a quiet moment where something inside her finally unclenched. Maggie sat beneath the soft buzz of the archive room's overhead lights. The letter spread before her like a confession whispered from the grave. Lyle's handwriting still looked like it had been written yesterday. Ink sharp loop steady, the pressure of each pen stroke betraying the parts of him that had never known ease. She read it one final time, her fingers tracing the edges like she was smoothing out the wrinkles in a story too long misunderstood. You don't know what staying costs. She did now. Every word had become a quiet rebellion against the lies that tried to replace him. Against the daughter who once used microphones like weapons, against the silence Maggie had carried like a second spine. She folded the letter carefully, each crease deliberate, and slipped it into the protective sleeve marked Archival Brennan Foundation Origin File No. 1. Then she slid it into the wooden drawer at the back of the foundation office, tucked between a photo of the first scholarship recipient and a printed copy of her op-ed. No podiums, no applause, just permanence. The ceremony for the dedication was held that afternoon in the library of a small Boise middle school. Not the fanciest location, but one that mattered. The school had requested to house the Brennan Foundation's founding display, photos, the scholarship list, a framed copy of Maggie's piece, and now a sealed envelope resting behind UV-safe glass. The exhibit was titled Endurance and Clarity: What Truth Looks Like. Dozens showed up: educators, local donors, and a handful of students. The principal gave a short, heartfelt introduction. A teacher who'd lost her brother to suicide recited part of Maggie's op-ed aloud. When it was Maggie's turn to speak, she declined. Instead, she stood for a photo, nodded politely, and accepted the thank you plaque handed to her with trembling hands. The room clapped, and when it was over, she left. Dany had not come. Maggie hadn't expected her to, but she'd sent flowers. No note, just a small tag that read, "For what was carried." Maggie didn't take the bouquet home. She gave it to a custodian cleaning up after the event. "For your wife," she said with a smile. "Or your table." Outside, the sky was overcast but soft, not ominous. The kind of gray that lets memory breathe. Maggie walked alone through the old streets of her neighborhood, the sound of her low heels tapping steadily against the pavement. When she reached the chain-link fence that outlined Pinebrook High School, she stopped. The campus hadn't changed much. New paint, a couple of solar panels, but the structure was the same. So was the air, dusty, chalk-heavy, laced with years of ambition and burnout. She rested her hand on the cool metal fence and let herself look. There, in that building, she had drafted policies and wiped tears off lockers. She had shielded students from gossip, from teachers with tempers, from the kind of homes that sent kids out the door already aching. And she had walked that hallway day after day while her own marriage cracked quietly under the surface. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed in slow, deep, and let the air hold her. Then, with her coat drawn tighter against the breeze, she turned and walked home. Legacy, she'd learned, wasn't what people said about you when you left. It was what they did with the space you made for them, to be honest. At the front door, she paused and looked back once. Then she whispered aloud, not to anyone, just the stillness. He left her the truth. I let it speak for both of us.